You'll be shocked to learn what Roman soldiers ate. Their food was so simple and effective that it allowed legionnaires to march farther, fight longer, and build faster than anyone before them. There is no magic in Rome's success, only strict calculation, discipline, and calories. We are used to admiring their tactics and armor, but we often forget what filled the mess kits and flasks of ordinary soldiers. But it was there, in the legionnaire's knapsack, that one of the main secrets of their invincibility was kept. We will break down the Roman soldier's menu into molecules. From the main grain to the unusual drink that served as an energy booster and antiseptic. We will understand how food logistics became a strategic weapon that allowed Rome to hold vast territories. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn which product, considered the drink of the poor, was actually a secret superweapon that supported the health and endurance of entire legions. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of the Roman army, which was not weapons. The basis of everything was not strength, but endurance. And this endurance was provided by food based on three principles: simplicity, calorie content, and transportability. These are the three pillars on which the supply of the legions rested. Imagine a modern expedition to Antarctica or Everest, where every gram of food must be carefully calculated for calories, weight, and nutritional value. The Roman army operated on similar principles, but on a scale of tens of thousands of people and over many months of campaigns. If you were responsible for supplying a legion on a campaign through hostile territory, you would quickly realize that the choice between a varied menu and combat effectiveness is obvious. Survival requires sacrifices in the area of culinary pleasures. The Roman command understood that complex and varied food was a logistical nightmare. Therefore, the diet was reduced to the absolute minimum of necessary products. No delicacies, only functional fuel for the body. This approach instilled discipline and moderation in the soldiers. They got used to making do with little and not depending on comfort. Such a Spartan diet tempered their character no worse than drill training. The philosophy of Roman military nutrition was based on the understanding that the army was a machine and the soldiers were its components, which had to function with maximum efficiency. Variety in nutrition created dependence on specific foods, which could paralyze the army when certain ingredients were unavailable. Standardizing the diet made the legions independent of local conditions and the vagaries of supply. The psychological aspect of a simple diet was no less important than the practical one. Soldiers accustomed to luxury and food became vulnerable in extreme conditions. Roman legionaries, content with simple food, could maintain their fighting spirit even in the harshest circumstances, as their expectations were realistic and achievable. Soldiers had to carry most of their provisions themselves. This meant that food had to be light, compact, and have a long shelf life. Every gram in a backpack counted. Therefore, preference was given to dry foods that did not spoil for weeks. Grain, crackers, dried meat, and cheese formed the basis of the diet. This food did not require special storage conditions on the march. The concept of personal food supplies was revolutionary for antiquity. Unlike many armies, which relied on supply trains and local supplies, Roman legionaries carried a 3-day supply of food with them, which gave them tactical flexibility and independence from supply lines at critical moments. Food preservation technology was perfected. Grain was dried to less than 14% moisture content, which prevented mold and pests. Crackers were baked twice to completely remove moisture. Dried meat was treated with salt and spices, which not only preserved the product, but also had antiseptic properties. Such a standardized ration greatly simplified the work of the quartermasters. There was no need to search for dozens of different products in the conquered lands. It was enough to provide the army with just a few key resources. This food system was part of Rome's overall military machine. It was as standardized and efficient as their weapons or tactics. There was nothing superfluous about it, only strict and cold calculation. The logistical advantages of a standardized diet were enormous. Quartermasters did not need to study local products and adapt the supply system to each new province. They could focus on the efficient delivery of a limited set of goods, which reduced costs and increased the reliability of supplies. Standardization also made it possible to accurately calculate the Army's needs. Knowing the number of soldiers and the duration of the campaign, the command could determine the required quantities of each product with mathematical precision. This eliminated both shortages of provisions and excessive spending on surplus supplies. It was this calculation that allowed the legions to make multi-day forced marches. They could operate for weeks away from their main supply bases. Their autonomy was built into the simplicity of their rations. This approach demonstrated the genius of Roman military thinking. They understood that an army's strength lies not only in its swords, but also in its supply train. The simpler and more reliable the supply train, the more mobile and dangerous the army. The mobility of the Roman legions was their key tactical advantage. While their opponents were tied to specific territories and sources of supply, the Romans could appear anywhere at any time. This strategic mobility often decided the outcome of campaigns even before major battles began. The simplicity of the military diet also helped maintain discipline and order in the camp. The absence of temptations in the form of delicacies reduced conflicts between soldiers, and the uniformity of food emphasized the equality of all in the face of the common hardships of the campaign. Such a philosophy of nutrition seems incredibly harsh today. Do you think a modern army could maintain morale on such a simple and monotonous diet? Want to know a secret that will change your perception of Rome's power? At the heart of the soldier's diet was a single product: grain. It was grain, not swords or armor. That was the true symbol and foundation of the legionnaire's power. Imagine a modern army that relies on a single source of energy, such as energy bars. The Roman legions built their power around an even simpler product: ordinary grain, which was available anywhere in the empire. If you commanded an army operating in territories from Britain to Mesopotamia, you would understand the genius of choosing a product that can be found or grown almost anywhere people live. Each soldier received a strictly measured ration of grain, known as frumentum. This ration was not just food, but part of his salary. The state provided its soldiers with their main source of energy. Most often it was wheat, but depending on the region, barley or spelt could be used. Wheat was valued more highly because it produced better quality bread. Barley, on the other hand, was often considered a punishment and was given to units that had committed offenses. The grain ration system was not just a matter of nutrition, but also a powerful tool for discipline and motivation. The daily distribution of grain created a rhythm of military life and emphasized the soldiers' dependence on the state. The quality of the grain was directly linked to behavior. Distinguished units received the best wheat, while those who had committed offenses had to make do with coarse barley. The psychological significance of this system was enormous. Replacing wheat with barley was perceived as a serious humiliation, since barley bread was considered food for barbarians and animals. This simple measure of influence on the diet was more effective than many forms of physical punishment. The grain was given to the soldiers in its unprocessed form. This was done deliberately and had a profound practical significance. Whole grain keeps much longer than flour, which quickly spoils from moisture. This meant that each soldier had to grind his own portion. For this purpose, each unit of 8 men, called a contubernium, had hand mills. It was hard daily work that became part of the soldier's routine. The process of grinding grain by hand required considerable effort and time. About an hour a day to produce flour for one person. Hand mills weighed several kilograms, which added to the already heavy load of a legionnaire's equipment. However, this system ensured maximum freshness of the flour and prevented it from spoiling during long marches. The collective nature of grinding strengthened the bonds within the contubernium, the smallest tactical unit of the legion. 8 men who lived in the same tent and shared common responsibilities, including cooking, formed a strong combat group where each depended on the others. The legionaries used the flour to bake bread or make porridge. The bread, known as panis militaris, was coarse, dense, and very filling. It was the basis of every meal. Field ovens or simply hot stones were used to bake bread. Often the dough was rolled onto a stick and baked over coals. Ease of preparation was a key factor in field conditions. Military bread was radically different from modern ideas about bread. It was dense, heavy, and could be stored for several days without spoiling. Salt was often added to the dough, which not only improved the taste, but also helped preserve the product. Such bread provided a long-lasting feeling of satiety and was ideally suited for physical exertion. The technique of baking on hot stones or with a stick was versatile and did not require special equipment. Soldiers could bake bread in any conditions, using only fire and improvised means. This made them independent of stationary bakeries and specialized equipment. Another popular dish was poles, a thick porridge made from ground grain. It was a simple and quick dish to prepare. Salt, fat, or vegetables could be added to the porridge if available. The grain diet provided soldiers with a huge amount of slow carbohydrates. These carbohydrates provided them with energy for the whole day. They were the ideal fuel for long marches and heavy engineering work. Porridge was even easier to prepare than bread and required only water and fire. Its consistency could be varied depending on the circumstances. Made more liquid for quick consumption or thicker for long-lasting satiety. The addition of fat or meat turned simple porridge into a complete nutritious meal. The scientific basis for the grain diet was remarkable for its time. Slow carbohydrates provided a stable energy level throughout the day, which was critical for soldiers who had to remain operational from dawn to dusk. Unlike fast carbohydrates, grain foods did not cause sharp fluctuations in blood sugar levels and the associated bouts of fatigue. But grain wasn't the only food the soldiers ate. Ready to find out what simple and cheap drink replaced water, antiseptic, and energy gel all at once? What I'm about to tell you was the secret to the endurance of entire legions. If grain was fuel for the muscles, then Posca was the elixir that maintained health and morale. This drink, virtually unknown today, was an essential part of every Roman soldier's diet. Imagine a modern expedition to remote areas where there is no access to clean drinking water or medical care. In such conditions, every sip of liquid can be a matter of life and death. Roman legionnaires faced similar problems every day during months-long campaigns in unfamiliar lands. If you were responsible for the health of thousands of soldiers on a campaign, you would understand the genius of a solution that simultaneously quenches thirst, disinfects water, and prevents disease. Posca is essentially cheap wine vinegar diluted with water. While the elite drank pure wine, ordinary people and soldiers quenched their thirst with this drink. But its value lay not in its taste, but in its unique properties. First, Posca was an excellent thirst quencher. Its sour taste stimulated salivation and helped people tolerate the heat more easily. Unlike plain water, it was more effective at restoring strength. The physiology of quenching thirst with Posca was based on scientific principles that the Romans understood empirically. The sour taste activated the taste buds and stimulated saliva production, which created a feeling of freshness in the mouth even with minimal fluid intake. This was especially important in conditions of limited water supplies during long marches. Acetic acid also contributed to better absorption of fluids by the body. Unlike ordinary water, which is quickly excreted from the body, Posca remained in the tissues longer, providing more effective hydration. This allowed soldiers to remain functional even during intense sweating. Secondly, and most importantly, the acetic acid in the Posca had powerful antibacterial properties. In conditions where the quality of drinking water was questionable, the addition of vinegar made it safer. It was a simple and effective prevention of intestinal diseases, which were the scourge of any army. Thus, each soldier carried not just a flask of drink, but a kind of portable water disinfection system. This simple solution saved thousands of lives. It allowed the legions to remain combat-ready even in regions with poor sanitary conditions. The antibacterial properties of acetic acid were so effective that it could disinfect even heavily contaminated water from questionable sources. The concentration of vinegar in the drink was sufficient to destroy most pathogenic microorganisms, but the drink remained safe to consume. The incidence of disease in the Roman legions was significantly lower than that of their opponents. Largely thanks to Posca, intestinal infections, which could incapacitate entire units, were rare among Roman soldiers. This gave them a huge strategic advantage, especially in long campaigns. In addition, Posca was a source of calories and vitamin C. This helped prevent scurvy and maintain overall health. The drink was not just a liquid, but an important element of a balanced diet as far as possible. Making Posca required no effort. Soldiers simply added a portion of vinegar, which was transported in barrels to their water flask. Sometimes honey or herbs were added for flavor. Wine vinegar was a byproduct of winemaking, which made it cheap and available in huge quantities throughout the empire. The fermentation process that turned wine into vinegar happened naturally, without any extra production costs. This was perfect for supplying the army on a large scale. The proportions of the mixture were standardized, usually 1 part vinegar to 10 or 15 parts water. This concentration provided an optimal balance between disinfection effectiveness and acceptable taste. The addition of honey not only improved the taste, but also increased the calorie content of the drink. This drink was so important that its availability in the army was strictly controlled. A good commander's first concern was to ensure that his soldiers always had access to grain and Posca. These were the 2 pillars of the legion's health and discipline. Today, we would call Posca an isotonic or electrolyte drink. The Romans, unaware of such words, intuitively created the ideal drink for people subjected to heavy physical exertion. This is an example of how practical experience can lead to solutions that are ingenious in their simplicity. Modern sports drinks attempt to replicate the effects that Posca provided naturally. Electrolyte balance, hydration maintenance, a source of fast carbohydrates, all these functions were performed by a simple vinegar drink invented 2,000 years ago. The history of Posca is a story of how the simplest and cheapest product became a strategic resource. It gave the Roman army a huge advantage. Their soldiers were less prone to illness and retained their strength longer than their opponents. The strategic importance of Posca went far beyond simply quenching thirst. An army whose soldiers remained healthy and combat-ready in conditions where their opponents were falling ill en masse gained a decisive advantage. Posca was one of the secret weapons of the Roman military machine, an inconspicuous but critically important element of their success. Are you ready for the shocking truth about the diet of gladiators and legionnaires? Although carbohydrates formed the basis of their diet, the Roman command understood perfectly well the importance of protein for maintaining muscle mass. Therefore, protein-rich foods were an essential part of a soldier's ration. Imagine a modern athlete or soldier whose diet is carefully balanced in terms of macronutrients to maintain peak physical condition. Roman quartermasters intuitively understood the same principles of sports nutrition that are studied today by sports science. If you were responsible for the physical training of soldiers who had to march 30 kilometers a day with a 45-kilogram load, you would quickly realize that carbohydrates alone are not enough. Muscles need protein for recovery and growth. The most common source of protein was meat, but not fresh meat, rather canned meat. Most often it was pork in the form of salted lard or bacon, known as laridum. This product was ideal for camping conditions. Salted and dried meat could be stored for months without any refrigeration. It was fairly light and high in calories. A small piece of such bacon could significantly increase the nutritional value of a soldier's porridge. The technology for producing laridum was refined over centuries of experimentation. Pork fat was salted using sea salt, which contained natural preservatives and minerals. The salting process took several weeks, during which the salt completely saturated the meat, creating an unfavorable environment for the growth of bacteria. The finished product could be stored for up to a year, even in hot climates. The choice of pork was due not only to its availability, but also to its high-fat content, which served as an additional preservative. Pork fat contained about 40–50% protein and the same amount of fat, which made it an extremely high-calorie product, up to 500 calories per 100 grams. The fat contained in bacon was a valuable source of energy. In cold climates, it helped soldiers keep warm. Rendered fat was also used to prepare other foods. In addition to pork, cheese, or caseus was an important source of protein. Cheese is essentially preserved milk. It was nutritious, had a long shelf life, and was easy to transport. The physiology of fat absorption made laridum the ideal fuel for a body subjected to extreme stress. Fats provide twice as much energy per gram as carbohydrates and are consumed more slowly by the body. This meant that a soldier who ate a piece of salted lard in the morning could maintain a high energy level until evening. Fat rendered from laridum was used to fry other foods, which significantly increased their calorie content and taste. This fat was also used for medical purposes. It was applied to wounds and used as a base for medicinal ointments. Most often, these were hard, salty cheeses, similar to modern brinza or pecorino. They could be eaten on their own with bread, or added to porridge for flavor and nutrition. Cheese was an integral part of a soldier's diet. Legumes such as lentils, peas, and beans also played an important role. They were a cheap and accessible source of plant protein. In the form of thick soup, they perfectly complemented the grain-based diet. Roman cheeses were produced using a technology that maximized their shelf life. Their high salt content and low moisture content made them virtually immune to spoilage. Hard cheeses, such as pecorino, contained up to 35% protein and could be stored without refrigeration for up to 6 months while retaining their nutritional properties. The process of making such cheeses required a minimum of equipment, which allowed them to be produced in the field. Legions often took dairy cattle with them, especially goats, whose milk quickly curdled into simple sour cheese, providing soldiers with a fresh source of protein. When a legion was stationed in camp for a long time, fresh meat could be added to the diet. For this purpose, hunting expeditions were organized or livestock was purchased from the local population. But this was more of a luxury than the norm. This combination of plant and animal proteins gave soldiers everything they needed to stay in shape. Their diet was simple but well thought out. It was aimed at maximum efficiency at minimum cost. Legumes were a real discovery in Roman military nutrition. Lentils and peas contained up to 25% protein and were rich in fiber, which aided digestion. In addition, legumes contained iron, which was critically important for soldiers who lost it through sweat and microtraumas. Preparing legumes required lengthy soaking and cooking, but the result was a hearty and nutritious soup that could satisfy a soldier for a whole day. Pieces of laridum or cheese were often added to the soup, creating a complete protein dish. The combination of different protein sources provided a full spectrum of amino acids necessary for muscle growth and recovery. Modern nutritional science confirms that this combination of animal and plant proteins is optimal for people undergoing intense physical exertion. But how did soldiers prepare all this food in the field without access to kitchens? In the next chapter, we will look into a legionnaire's field mess kit and learn the secrets of his field cooking. Each legionnaire was not only a soldier, but also a cook. There was no centralized food preparation system in the Roman army. Responsibility for food lay with the smallest combat unit, the contubernium. Imagine a modern military operation where, instead of a central mess hall, each group of 8 soldiers has to cook their own food using only what they can carry with them. Such a system seems archaic, but the Romans turned it into a powerful strategic advantage. If you were commanding an army in conditions where any delay could cost the lives of thousands of people, you would understand the genius of a solution that makes each unit completely self-sufficient in terms of food. A contubernium consisted of 8 soldiers who lived in one tent and shared a common life. They had a common pot, millstones for grinding grain, and other necessary accessories. They cooked and ate together. This system was incredibly effective. It freed the army from the need to carry cumbersome field kitchens. This significantly increased the mobility of the legions. The structure of the contubernium was not accidental. It was the optimal group for collective survival. 8 people could effectively divide all the necessary duties among themselves. 2 were responsible for obtaining water and fuel, 2 were engaged in grinding grain, 2 prepared food, and 2 maintained order in the camp and guarded property. This system ensured interchangeability. In case of illness or injury of one of the group members, the others could take over his duties. The absence of a centralized food supply system prevented catastrophic supply failures. Even if part of the food supply train was lost or captured by the enemy, this only affected individual contubernia, not the entire army. Each group had its own supplies and could continue to function autonomously. Every evening after setting up camp, the soldiers lit fires and began to cook. 2 of them ground the grain, while others lit the fire and brought water. It was a well-coordinated team effort. The main kitchen tool was a bronze cauldron, or vase. It was used to cook porridge or soup. The soldiers also had frying pans for frying meat or baking flatbread. The cooking process was ritualized and carried out with military precision. Everyone knew their role and performed it without additional commands. While some soldiers were setting up the tent, others were already starting to prepare dinner. This synchronization was the result of months of training and living together. The bronze vase cauldrons were a masterpiece of engineering. They had a flat bottom for stability on uneven surfaces, thick walls for even heat distribution, and convenient handles for carrying. The volume of the cauldron was calculated to hold exactly 8 servings, no more, no less. The pot weighed about 2 kilograms, which was a compromise between durability and portability. Simple tableware was used for eating. Everyone had their own bowl, or patra, and spoon. The bowls were often made of wood so they wouldn't break during the march. The process of cooking and eating together brought the soldiers closer together. It turned random people into a brotherhood in arms. The evening meal by the campfire was an important social ritual. Personal tableware was one of the most valuable items a soldier possessed. Wooden bowls were carved from hardwoods and often decorated with simple patterns or the owner's initials. Losing a bowl meant having to eat with your hands or beg for temporary tableware from your comrades, which was humiliating for a professional soldier. Spoons were made of wood, bone, or bronze. Their shape was optimized for eating thick porridge and soup, the main dishes of a soldier's diet. Many legionnaires carried spoons on their belts next to their daggers, emphasizing their importance for daily survival. In addition, this system instilled independence and responsibility in the soldiers. Everyone knew that if they did not do their part, the entire unit would go hungry. It was a miniature school of survival. Soldiers received food for several days in advance. They stored it in their knapsacks. Each soldier was responsible for the safety of his own share. The psychology of collective responsibility was a powerful motivating factor. A soldier who was lazy or careless in his duties quickly became an outcast in the group. Social pressure from comrades was often more effective than official punishment from commanders. The system of individual food storage taught soldiers to plan and economize. Each had to calculate his supplies so that they would last until the next replenishment. This developed skills that would be useful to them in civilian life after service. Thus, the entire food supply system in the Roman army was decentralized. It relied on self-sufficiency and teamwork. This made it flexible and resistant to any difficulties. The decentralization of food supply was part of the overall Roman military philosophy, which sought to make each unit as autonomous as possible. This ensured the incredible resilience of the entire system. The army could continue to function even in the event of serious disruptions in logistics or the loss of personnel. Each contubernium was a microcosm of the entire legion, capable of independent existence in extreme conditions. What if I told you that everything you believed about nutrition was incomplete? In addition to the staple foods, grain, meat, and cheese, there were a number of additives that played a critical role in a legionnaire's diet. Without these seemingly minor details, the entire system could collapse. The most important of these elements was salt. In a world without refrigerators, salt was the main preservative. It was thanks to salt that meat and fish could be preserved for many months. But its importance was not limited to this. During heavy physical exertion and in hot climates, soldiers lost huge amounts of salt through sweat. Replenishing it was vital to maintaining the body's water-salt balance. A lack of salt led to rapid fatigue, muscle spasms, and heat stroke. Therefore, the Roman command ensured that the army was provided with sufficient salt. It is no coincidence that the word soldier comes from the coin solidus, which was used to pay salaries, including for the purchase of salt. Another important supplement was olive oil. In the Mediterranean diet, oil was the main source of fat. It added calories to food and made it tastier. Olive oil was not only used for food. Soldiers rubbed it on their skin to protect themselves from the sun and wind. It was also used to care for the leather elements of armor. When the legion was in camp, the diet could be supplemented with vegetables and fruits. Soldiers bought them from locals or grew them in small gardens near the fortress. These included onions, garlic, cabbage, turnips, and various root vegetables. Garlic was especially highly valued. It was believed to give strength and have healing properties. It was added to almost all dishes for flavor and disinfection. These seemingly minor products were actually critically important. They provided the body with vitamins and minerals that were lacking in the main diet. They were the link that made a simple diet complete. But how did all these products get to the front lines, hundreds of kilometers from Rome? In the next chapter, we will reveal the secrets of Roman military logistics. The success of the Roman army would have been impossible without a brilliantly organized supply system. Delivering food to tens of thousands of people in enemy territory was a daunting task. The Romans solved it with their characteristic efficiency. The basis of the entire system was the annona militaris, a special tax collected from the provinces to supply the army. Most often, it was levied not in money, but directly in goods, grain, oil, and wine. This made it possible to create huge food reserves near the borders. These supplies were then delivered to the active army. All available means of transport were used for this purpose. Food was transported by sea and rivers on ships, which was the cheapest and fastest way. On land, cargo was transported by oxen and mules, which pulled thousands of carts. The baggage train, or impedimenta, was an integral part of any legion. Great attention was paid to its protection. The Romans were masters of road construction. Their famous paved roads were not only for trade, but also for the rapid movement of troops and supplies. A good road allowed the baggage train to move quickly and in any weather. Along the roads, every 20-30 kilometers, there were inns and warehouses. This made it possible to organize a relay delivery system. The army could replenish its supplies as it advanced. When a legion operated in an area where there were no roads, supplies became a major problem. In such cases, soldiers carried as much provisions as they could. The autonomy of the units was crucial. Sometimes the army resorted to requisitioning supplies from the local population. However, Roman commanders tried not to abuse this practice. Looting caused hatred and could provoke an uprising in the rear. Organized food purchases were preferred. The officers responsible for this, the quaestors, paid for goods at fixed prices. This allowed them to maintain normal relations with the inhabitants of the conquered territories. This whole complex system worked like clockwork. It required precise planning, discipline, and enormous organizational efforts. It was this invisible work of the quartermasters that allowed the legions to fight anywhere and any time. The diet of a Roman soldier was not static. It varied significantly depending on whether the legion was on the march or in a stationary camp. On the march, survival was the main concern, while in the fortress, there was an opportunity to diversify the menu. During a long campaign, the diet was as ascetic as possible. It consisted of foods that soldiers could carry themselves. These were rusks, or buccellatum, dried meat, cheese, and of course, grain. Bucellatum was a type of soldier's bread that was baked twice. It was very hard and dry, but could be stored almost indefinitely. Before eating, it was usually soaked in water or wine. Such a diet was monotonous and tasteless, but it served its main purpose. It provided enough calories to withstand many kilometers of marching in full armor. That was all that was required of it. The situation was completely different in the permanent camps, or castra stativa. These fortresses were the permanent locations of the legions on the borders of the empire. Here, the soldiers' lives were much more comfortable. Full-fledged bakeries, kitchens, and warehouses were built in such fortresses. Supplies were regular and abundant. It became possible to prepare more complex dishes. The diet was supplemented with fresh produce. Each fortress had adjacent territories where vegetables were grown and livestock was raised. Soldiers received fresh bread, meat, and vegetable soups. In addition, legionnaires were actively engaged in hunting and fishing. This was not only a way to diversify their diet, but also a form of leisure. They obtained additional food in the rivers and forests around the fortresses. Trade with the local population also flourished. Soldiers who received a salary could buy fruit, honey, eggs, and other delicacies at the markets. This added a pleasant variety to their diet. Thus, life in the fortress was much more satisfying and comfortable than life on the march. But every legionnaire knew that the trumpet could sound at any moment, and then he would have to shoulder his bag of crackers and grain and set off on the march again. Maintaining a huge professional army was extremely costly. The Roman state found an elegant way to optimize these expenses. Soldiers' meals were not free. Their cost was deducted from their pay. Each legionnaire received a fixed annual salary. Various deductions were made from this amount. The largest were expenses for food, clothing, and equipment. The cost of the basic ration was standardized. It was calculated so that soldiers could eat well, but still have some money left over for other needs. This system encouraged soldiers to be thrifty. This approach had several advantages. First, it reduced the direct burden on the state treasury. The army, in essence, partially supported itself. Second, it prevented food from spoiling and being squandered. Soldiers who paid for their food out of their own pockets treated it with much more care. They were interested in ensuring that every gram of grain was used for its intended purpose. The deduction system was transparent. Every legionnaire knew how much he was paying and what for. This prevented abuse by the officers responsible for supplies. The money remaining after all deductions could be spent by the soldier at his discretion. He could save it, send it to his family, or spend it on additional food and entertainment. This gave him a sense of financial independence. This economic model was part of a general contract between the soldier and the state. The state provided the opportunity to serve and earn money. The soldier, in turn, assumed part of the costs of his own maintenance. This system was another manifestation of Roman pragmatism. It allowed for the effective management of vast resources, and it worked, maintaining the army's combat readiness for centuries. Ultimately, the soldier's pot was not just a place to cook food, it was the center of a complex economic system. This system tied together the interests of the state, the army, and each individual legionnaire. The simple and austere diet of a Roman soldier was not a disadvantage, but one of his main advantages. It was perfectly balanced for a man whose life consisted of extreme physical exertion. This diet created warriors capable of withstanding superhuman trials. The diet was based on slow-release carbohydrates from whole grains. They provided a steady and long-lasting supply of energy. This allowed the legionnaires to make their famous forced marches, covering up to 30-40 kilometers a day in full gear. A sufficient amount of protein from meat, cheese, and legumes maintained their muscle mass. Roman legionnaires were not only endurance runners, but also strong fighters. They were also builders who erected fortresses, bridges, and roads. Fats from lard, cheese, and olive oil provided additional energy. They were especially important in cold regions, such as Britain or Germany. High-calorie foods helped them withstand the harsh climate. The drink Posca served as a hydrator and antiseptic. It protected against dehydration and disease. A healthy army is a combat-ready army. This diet, low in sugar and fast carbohydrates, shaped a particular type of physique. Legionnaires were lean, muscular, and incredibly resilient. Archaeological finds confirm the excellent condition of their bones and teeth. The monotony of the diet strengthened their character. Soldiers got used to deprivation and did not demand comfort. This psychological resilience was no less important than physical strength. The food system was inextricably linked to the training and discipline system. Together, this created the ideal soldier. He was a universal fighting machine, capable of performing any task. Thus, the secret of the Roman army lies not only in their tactics or weapons, it lies in a system thought out to the smallest detail, where nutrition played one of the key roles. Simple soldiers' porridge was the foundation on which the greatness of the Roman Empire was built. This diet was not for gourmets, but for professionals. It was simple, effective, and fully met the tasks facing the legionaries. It was a diet designed to conquer the world. We can see that the Roman legionnaires' diet was not just a set of foods, but a carefully thought-out system. This system was aimed at achieving maximum combat effectiveness with minimum logistical costs. Simplicity, functionality, and standardization were its main principles. From whole grain bread and the sour drink Posca to salted bacon and a decentralized cooking system, every element of this diet had its place. This diet provided energy for long marches, protein for strength, and protection from disease. It was as much a weapon of Rome as the famous gladius or scutum. The history of the soldier's diet teaches us that great achievements are often based on very simple and pragmatic decisions. The success of the Roman military machine would have been impossible without this reliable and effective fuel. This is a striking example of how competent logistics and care for the basic needs of soldiers become a strategic advantage. Please suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. Perhaps you are interested in the weapons, tactics, or daily life of other great armies of the past? And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our new historical investigations.